tutorial for Lightroom Mobile and explain some of the most commonly used tools and what they're used for and how you can use them on your images. So I'm going to start by importing an image by pressing the button on the bottom right, and I'm going to scroll to find the image that I want to use. Then I'm going to add it to my Lightroom library. Once it's imported, you can select all photos to find your image, and there it is. Okay, so if you want to adjust just a portion of the image, so let's say that there's a particular spot where you want to edit it, maybe you want to make it brighter or adjust the coloring or something, you can use the Selective Tool, and you hit Selective and you press the plus sign, and you can choose either a brush, and what you can do is paint on the area that you want to selectively edit, or you can use a radial filter, which is going to be a circle, or you can use a graduated filter, which is just going to be a gradient where it gradually grows from more strong on the edit that you select to blending into the normal part of the image. And that you can use that if you want to maybe adjust a sky. I commonly use it on skies if I want to see more of the clouds, so I would decrease the exposure on that, and then it would blend into the rest of the image. But I'm not going to do any of those today. I just want you to know that they're there if you want to use them. The healing brush is something that you can use if you want to remove blemishes or distracting elements from the photo. And healing is just going to use, it's going to be kind of a smart tool that will just remove it. And cloning is going to be where you can select a portion of the image that you want to really clone from or copy from and put it on that image. So if you want to remove a power line, you could clone the sky around it and then paint it on there. So if I wanted to, for example, get rid of this outlet in here, then I could do that with the healing brush. But today I really just want to focus on the light panel and the most commonly used tools in Lightroom Mobile. I'm going to start with cropping. I've already opened the crop tool, and I'm just with my finger going to kind of try to make a straight line with those picture frames just to make it a little bit more straight. And so I'm just using my finger to drag here, and then I'm going to press the check mark when I'm done. Now I'm going to go over to the light panel, and this is typically where I'm spending most of my time editing, is in the light panel. And I'm going to start at the top and then work my way down, because I think that's kind of the best way to get a feel for your image and what you want. So I'm going to start with the exposure, which is just the amount of light in the image. And I like my images to be a little bit bright, so I'm going to pull that up. That's too much, and I just kind of find what I like. Contrast is just going to be exactly that, the contrast of the colors and between the lights and the darks. And I do like my images to be a little bit more contrasty, so I'm going to pull that up as well. Okay, my phone is being really slow, but there we go. Okay, now I'm doing the contrast, and then that's good. Okay, now the highlights are going to be the light portion of the image. So anytime you see lights, that's the highlights, and the shadows are going to be the darker portions of the image. So typically I would pull the highlights of an image down, because most often those highlights are going to be blown out, and then the shadows I'm typically pulling up just to make it a little bit brighter in those dark portions so that it's a little bit more balanced. The whites I'm usually bringing up just a smidge, and whites are exactly that, just the whites in the image, and blacks are the blacks in the image, so the darker portions. And I like my images to be more contrasty, so I usually pull the blacks down, and usually when I edit, it makes kind of an S curve like this with the sliders. And so next I'm going to go to the curve, and what you can do is do the tone curve, and you can adjust the darks in your image by pulling this part down. You can adjust the midtones by bringing this up or down. And by the way, you can adjust darks up or down too. And you can adjust the highlights by bringing this up or down too. So I usually like my highlights to be pretty balanced. I'm usually bringing my midtones up just a smidge, and then I'm usually bringing my darks down, especially when I'm doing portraits. But in this particular image, I don't want it to be too much, I don't want there to be too much contrast, so I'm going to leave it like that. Now the red, the green, and the blue, you can adjust the specific color channels in your image. So on digital images, all the colors are made up of some combination of red, green, and blue. And so if you want to adjust one of those colors in particular overall in the image, those channels, then you can do that with the curve. And you can play around with that and see what you like and what works for you. Now the color panel is also really important. And again, I'm going to go top down. The temperature panel is just going to control the warmth of your image, whether it's more, think of like a sunny day, so it's more on the yellow side, or a dreary day, more on the blue side. That's how I think of it. So in general, rule of thumb, you just want to try to make your whites look white. That's why it's called white balance. And some photographers prefer a cooler look to their image, and some prefer a warmer look. And it really is just personal preference. But in general, just try to make the whites look white. Tint is going to balance between green and magenta, and you can adjust that just by pulling the slider over. So if your image has a green color cast, then you can change it, or you can pull it over to be more magenta. Or if you're shooting next to a brick wall or something and you're getting a red color cast, you can change the tint over to the green side. But I actually like where it is now, so I'm going to leave it. Now the vibrance and the saturation control the color, and they're actually named really well. Vibrance is going to be how vibrant the colors are, how much they kind of glow, and how bright they are. And the saturation is going to be the depth of the color, the richness of the color. And if you like your colors to be more muted, then you can turn the saturation down. And if you like them to be bolder, you can turn it up. So it just depends. Again, it's personal preference. I like bold colors, so I usually turn the vibrance up, but I don't like them to be too bold. So I find that the vibrance is going to be a little bit more, not as abrupt as the saturation, not as bold. So I usually adjust vibrance before I adjust saturation. But again, it's personal preference. Now the effects panel, this is going to be really, really helpful if you are editing something like trees or leaves or a flower or a ring shot, and it's just going to control the clarity, how sharp it is, and things like that. And I'm not really going to mess with it much in this particular image, but just want you to know that they're there. So if you want to make, if you're shooting pictures of your dog, if you want to make the fur more textured, then you can turn that slider up. Or if you want it to be clearer, you can do that. The dehaze tool is really handy if you're shooting into the sun and the image looks hazy, then you would slide it over to the right to get rid of the haziness. A vignette I don't typically use, but it's either going to put a dark circle around your image or a light circle around your image, depending on which way you go. If you're going for a film look, then that would be something that you could play with. And the grain is just going to be how much little specks you see in the image. So think of like a grainy film. And you can, if you're going for a film look, you can add grain to your image. The details panel, again, is just going to control, again, those little details. So you can sharpen your image if you want it to be a little bit more crisp. And then you can reduce the noise if your image, let's say you shot in low light and it's really grainy. You can adjust the noise to smooth it out, and it's going to smooth over that grain and the noise in the image. Now, I'm going to just talk about this panel briefly. The lens profile corrections and the chromatic aberration, those mostly happen on SLR cameras and not on phones. But chromatic aberration is just going to be if you have a really strong dark next to a really strong white, sometimes there will be a distortion that comes as like a little purple glow, and the chromatic aberration will remove that. And the lens profile corrections will correct any distortions from the lens that you're using, maybe some light fall off or a vignette that the image is doing, or just a distortion, and it'll correct that based on the lens that you're using. So it's not totally necessary, but I just want you to know what it is. Now the geometry panel is really cool. And you can actually change almost the perspective of where you shot the image. So if your image, I don't know if you've ever taken an image. I know I have, where I thought I was totally centered, but then I look at the picture and it looks like I was just off to the right a little bit or off to the left, and it just kills the composition. Well, you can actually adjust that. That's one cool thing about the updated Lightroom, is you can adjust that. So with the horizontal panel, it's almost like you're changing where you tilted the lens on, think of an X and Y axis on that horizontal axis, and you can adjust that if you want. So I'm going to adjust mine a little bit, and I think I'm going to go more this way to make it look like I took the image more straight on. And look how it kind of cut off the end of the couch. So I'm going to go to this X offset and move it. Isn't that cool? So it's like you can adjust where you took the picture. It's so awesome. And then you might be thinking, well, what about those weird white areas? Well, you can just go over to the crop tool and go back and crop that out. So let me do that. I'm going to crop that out. Crop it out on the top. And then just a smidge. I'm going to actually crop out the outlet as well. And then there we go. Oh, that made the leg of the couch. It kind of cropped that out. I don't want to do that, so I'm going to move it. It's important to pay attention to those little details. So if you're taking a picture of a person, for example, you don't want to cut off their toes. Watch out for those little details. So, uh-oh, I accidentally hit the auto button. Well, that's good. If you accidentally do anything, you can just hit the undo button. So I'm glad that I did that so I could show you that. Okay, so I think I'm good with that crop. Yep, that's better. So yeah, just pay attention to your composition. Try not to cut off, parts of the leg of the couch if you're shooting, or people's toes if you're doing a full body shot and stuff like that. And so you can do some really cool things with the geometry, so I'd encourage you to play around with that. And then for me, I feel like this image is done. So hopefully that was a good overview of some of the tools. If you have any questions, let me know. I would love to make a video for you. And if you learned something new, comment there as well. I'm always love hearing from people how my video helped them. So I'd love to hear from you. Thanks for watching. Happy editing.